right off the cut, I know that this video is going to be a little bit contentious. You're either going to agree with me wholeheartedly, or you're going to respond that I am an idiot and should not be spouting my ideas on the internet. That's fine. We'll see what we come up with. I want to talk today about homebrew in D&D, and not like coming up with ideas or, the process of a class versus a subclass and all the like meta kind of things when it comes to justifying a homebrew's existence. I want to talk about the fact that you've gotten past all that, you've come up with something, and now we're testing. Yes, math. The first thing I really want to make sure that we are looking at when we do this is that we are going to have some kind of a baseline to compare against. I really like RPGbot's fundamental math of character optimization. I think that he does a good job of kind of breaking down a couple of different builds so you can get a rough idea of what you are going to be comparing against. In this case, if you're above this high DPR, it could be a little concerning. We're going to be looking at the target DPR. When I come up with homebrew, I like to kind of live between these two columns. This Warlock column is actually the one I tend to use the most because I find the math to be the easiest. You're looking at, in general, a Warlock pure classed with Eldritch Blast, Agonizing Blast, and Hex. So you're going to get jumps at 5, 11, and 17 as you get extra beams of Eldritch Blast. You're going to tack on an extra D10 plus 5, arguably, depending on where your charisma is. I think 5 is just the easiest. And you're going to tack on a D6 to each of those. So you get a very kind of steppy bit of damage increase here. Hold up. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to come in and let you guys know that we have a Discord that is very slowly starting to grow. It is where I'm going to be putting out opportunities to join me for some playtest sessions. I'll build the character sheets for you based on a couple of questions based on what you want to play, and we'll run the session. I'll DM, you play, I'll record the data, you give me feedback, we'll have a good time. Check out the Discord. The most important thing in my head is not pure balance, it is relative balance. So you want your character to be relatively balanced against the rest of the party that he's going to be with. You don't want to really compare the damage output of a fighter versus a wizard because those are kind of different playstyles. We like to look at more the general list of it where you're going to be in a party, and you don't want someone sitting there at the end of combat and be like, what homebrew are you using? Because you are easily doing 2 to 3 times more than anybody else. And you respond with, well, I came up with it on my own and it looks fine. It never looks fine. We need to test. So what you need to do is basically get some friends. If you don't have any friends, get some people who are at least willing to do this with you. Build the character sheets yourself. They need to be consistent. So if you're going to max out their attack or casting stat, then you need to compare them against another character that has the equal maxed attack or casting stat. So it doesn't do any good for you to, roll randomly for this character but not for this character. You basically want to give everybody the same stat line so that you have a fair comparison. This one, the Warlock gets an ASI to boost their charismas at 4 and 8. For simplicity of math, I'm just going to assume that charisma is maxed, something like that. So what I like to do is take this and chart it out, and you can really see the difference of where these damage values sit. This assumes a combat lasts for about 3 rounds. I assume combat is between 3 and 5 rounds, but 3 I think is a pretty good spot. And then what do? Well, you play. But you don't play with like a story, you play with like a very combat focused kind of a setup if you really want to be balancing for combat. When you get to out of combat stuff, it's harder to just like universally balance because there's so much that can happen and the DM has so much more control outside of combat that he can just say no to things. In combat is combat, right? Like you're going to use your character sheet, you're going to roll dice, and you're going to basically put out numbers. So what I did is I took this class that I'm working on here. This is a full 11-page document, fully built class, start to finish, 1 to 20, gets everything. It has multiple subclasses all down here. Basically what I did for each of these subclasses here, right? We have the Abyss Knight, the Black Blood. I didn't do the Eventide because I've already tested that one. A Twilight Fletcher and a Padfoot, and I'm in the process of actively running a Radiant in a homebrew game that I'm playing in, so I didn't bother with that. So we had all of these different classes. I built them all at level 7, which means that they all have their first and second subclass abilities. Let's be honest, most games end around the 11th level mark, so the next version of this test I'm going to run is going to happen at 11th, so it'll give them the third part of their subclass, and I ran a game and recorded the data. So this is kind of the general dashboard of what it looks like. I was testing subclass features, I was testing some unique mechanics, I was testing some of the arts, which are just unique spells for the class, and I recorded them all. And I also recorded them all based on each of the things that happened in combat. So as you can see, my first combat only took 4 turns, so we are well in our planned set of parameters. The second combat was way shorter with just 2 turns, and not everyone actually even got a turn. They absolutely demolished my boss. I rolled very poorly, they rolled very well, they planned very well. It was great to see. So I got to see kind of like a peak version of it. They were learning the class in the first one, so they went through and all that. And we got some really interesting data. So on this, one of the things that is interesting about this class that I was testing is that your spell save or your art save DC is not set the way that it normally is. It is just a d20 plus your charisma modifier. So your DC could be anywhere from, assuming a max stat, 6 to 26. Which means that you're not going to be looking at the kind of standard distribution of, monsters have to roll the 16 or whatever to beat your save. You might have a particularly powerful spell in this case, and I wanted to see how that worked out. Well, throughout all of these, right, they cast basically 26 different arts. Their average was 19. This is with no pluses or whatever. So rolling this way with this ability here actually netted them a net higher save than it would have if their spell save DC was set in the normal way, which is 8 plus proficiency plus your stat modifier. That might seem a little bit powerful, but there were plenty of times where, if we look, their art DC was low, right? So if the average was supposed to be 16, they had an 11 and a 13 here. They had a 15, which was pretty close, and then they rolled a couple of very, very high ones at the end here, which I think is really interesting. The way this class is set up is everything is very, very blasty. There are no concentration spells, and they all last basically 1 turn, or like 1.5 turns kind of a thing. So in this case, the DC was expected to be 16, so they were +3 on average. That might be a little powerful. I need to test more on that. That's one of the notes that I have that I need to really take more of a note of where the average DC lies. If you look at the DMG, I don't remember the page, I think it's like 274 or 276 or whatever. If you're coming up with homebrew spells, this is their recommended value. They have it from cantrip all the way to 9th level. This is what they say, in general, spells should do. So a 4th level spell should, on average, to a single target, do 6d10 damage. If you're doing multiple targets, it should be 76 damage. If you look at 3rd level spells, Fireball is hot. It is 8d6 damage, which means that in general, Fireball is outside of its average expected value. Same with Lightning Bolt, because they're legacy spells, and it is well documented that they are hot because they are legacy, like premier spells. When you look at like something like Synaptic Static, which is a 5th level spell, it'll come in right at its 8d6 damage, or maybe it's 9d6, but it has a rider where it subtracts, it kind of does like a little mini Bane, so it kind of comes down a little bit. But in general, we were comparing arts against these values here. Well, in general, we did a kind of poor job of tracking that. Like I have a couple here. This is actually a good one here. So they did this spell at 3rd level. The damage that they did was 23, which means that it is just a little bit hot, but it's within the error of rolling dice, so it's pretty close. This one is at 4th level. It's 29 damage. This one was even more hot, but they rolled well on it, kind of a thing. These are the things that I was tracking to go ahead and, make sure that we're doing. When we look at the average art damage, they in general did things at the highest level available to them, which put the average damage across the board at 22.71. So that lives right in between these two, which in my head means that the art damage is pretty good. It is a little bit in between where it should be on the distribution chart. I need more data, which means I need to run this again, but we are kind of in the realm that we're supposed to be. We might need to do a little bit of tweaking. Another thing that we looked at was if you're going to be doing this damage on average and you're only going to hit about 65% of the time, well, where does that bring our DPR or our expected DPR? It brings it down to 14.76, which is actually below the Warlock value. Now, I know that a lot of these are not great. Like I said, I need more data, but this is the process. This is how it starts, and I'll make a new document for each of these. This way I can kind of keep track of things. When we look at these two values, the 22 and the 14.76, okay, the 14.76 is dead on our target DPR. And this accounts for the 65% chance to hit. So that means that our math is, in general, pretty good. If we are hitting more often because we have this higher average DC, and let's assume that we hit 100% of the time, our average damage is 22.71. Well, that puts us below the high DPR, but above the target DPR. It puts us pretty close to the 2-weapon fighting rogue. If you look at the 2-weapon fighting rogue, it basically can do sneak attack every turn and has a little bit of a smoother DPR progression. So when we're comparing all of these numbers, this is kind of what we get. We also look at what arts were used, so we can find the ones that were a little bit hot versus, or kind of crowd favorites versus what ones need more looking at. They loved Blackest Night. Blackest Night is here. It is a healing spell. So the way that this one is written currently, 1 hit point of healing to the target, and you give them a larger pool of temporary hit points. This was really the only way that they had to heal besides potions, so not really surprising that this one was a fan favorite. Cracks in the Fabric is one that is used to temporarily lower AC. On a class that is kind of martially inclined, obviously this is very important, but also it's going to improve your ability to hit with spells that are to hit rolls versus saves. This one was a fan favorite. You can see that it comes up very regularly just throughout the whole fight here. And we can even go through and see, the Abyss Knight used it once. No, the Abyss Knight never used it. He did do some healing. The Black Blood, which is a very, very martial focused class, used it twice. The Twilight Fletcher, which is an archer, used it once here. The Padfoot, which is a little bit like a rangery kind of build, used it twice here. Shadowbind was a good one. This is kind of like a mini hold person. That one came up twice, 3 times. It was clearly right here. Very, very well used the way that they used it. They ended up generating 53 temporary hit points across 2 fights, and it's really hard to calculate their average weapon damage because they crit so many times, either from hold person like stuff from Shadowbind or just from rolling 20s. So I need a lot better damage here. It's kind of tough to tell what's going on, which is why I have it noted as such. One thing that is important to go through is try to make as many notes as possible, right? So this one, they ended up with 3 attacks. They missed 2 of them, so their DPR is going to go down. This one, they rolled very well on this Chaos Strike, which I don't have up at the moment, but they saved for half, right? This one they missed. This one was auto crits, auto crit, auto crit, crit. Like, as you can see, their weapon damage is scaled up a bit from how much they hit. This one was 1 weapon damage and 1 art damage, which came from Cracks in the Fabric. This is getting to be a little bit rambly, but you kind of see what's going on here. The best thing to do is test, tweak, test, tweak, test, tweak. This version that they were testing was realistically version 5, right? So this was already the 4th version and 4th update that I went through. We're now at V6, making a few more tweaks. I'm going to do another test in the near future. V7 is where I feel like I would be confident in letting someone else use it at a table, or saying this is available at my table because I've tested it. And that's pretty much it. Realistically, the goal is to gather data, not from yourself, because I learned a lot from this class that I personally have been playing it wrong. or at least wrong in the way that these 4 people that I gave it to looked at it and said, okay, I understand, this is how it's played. It was really interesting to me. It's changed the way that I've been playing it when I play it as a player. It's given me kind of a new way to go about it. I feel a lot more confident about a lot of different things. So the takeaway here, all said and done, is you need to test, you need to collect data, and you need to act on the data. That being said, I have some things that I need testing. So if you are interested in helping me playtest, check out the Discord. We will be kind of running a playtest session in the near future. Other than that, hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you over in that Discord. See ya!